3 on the way out seems fine. Yeah.
That's why I didn't really make any recommendations, because I just didn't know those places. And,
Right. I went 2 different routes anyway, so I went north going out and then south coming back. So it was, except the turnpike coming back was fine.
All right, are we ready to start?
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay, we'll give about 30 seconds more for everybody to join. All right, fast 30 seconds. Right at the bottom of the hour here, I'd like to go ahead and get us started here and thank our presenters for being willing to present to us. I want to give just a couple of notes real quick for those of you who have not yet been to a session today. For our virtual presentation etiquette, we ask that you mute your microphone whenever you're not speaking, and that if you would like to raise your hands, you can raise your hand in the participant window. You can also put questions in the chat over the Becoming Management website where you join the meeting. This will be a 20-minute session, and when we're done, we'll allow, I guess when the presenters are done, we'll have some time for you to be able to ask your questions, and you can turn on your video and mic at that time. So with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters. Thank you.
Wonderful, Tanya. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us. We have been working on World Cafe and developing a World Cafe experiential design and protocol for academic use for a number of years now. And for the last year, we've been gathering data to understand qualitative and quantitative, to understand how well this is working in terms of student engagement and student participation. And so we'd like to just do a brief piece and talk to you about, what's the impetus behind World Cafe, what's the protocol look like, and then Dr. Urick will follow up with some in-classroom experiences. So let's get started. Dr. Yassin, would you like to begin?
So Robert Yassin from School of Business, Quinnipiac University, and as Therese said, we've been working with this for some time now, and we started taking some data. But as you all know, classroom discussions may range from very terrible. You finish some discussion, you feel really bad. What went wrong? And at times to go really very well, extremely productive. And it is not the number of times students are engaged in classroom discussions that determine how productive the learning is. It is the quality that matters. So that's why we adopted the World Cafe approach, which energize and shake up the classroom. It is a participative process. It allows participants to have creative and productive conversations while sitting in cafe style. That's how we got it named, like sitting around cafe style tables. And it is also an easy to use method for creating more authentic and consequential dialogue. It is a participative process which was created in response to the worldwide interest in dialogue methodologies suitable for organizations, corporations, communities. It facilitates transformational and dynamic conversations. There is the next slide, please.
Next slide. There we go. Sorry.
So there are multiple ways to conduct a successful and effective World Cafe, but there are some core design principles expected if the process is to be classified as such. And we've adapted and used it as we said, as a classroom facilitation tool. And as a pedagogical tool, it can be used in any class where you need all students to participate. And the exercise is designed for all categories of students: undergraduate students, graduate students, traditional students, non-traditional students, and any executive MBA, etc. It is an active, it's more of an active learning approach, which reinforce the content while also developing specific skills such as reflection, summarization, and reporting to understand different topics. It creates, one of the advantages is that it creates a sense of community engagement in the classroom, and it encourages students to engage in reflective dialogue in a relaxed and comfortable atmosphere, even for students who are introverts. So in essence, it creates a platform that helps students value respect for diversity of perspectives and cross-fertilization of ideas. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there are certain design principles of the World Cafe process. You need to clarify the context. You have to let the student understand the context within which you are going to use it, and create a hospitable environment. Tell them that everybody's idea matters, whichever table they are sitting on. Explore questions that matter. Teresa will talk more about this. Depending on the questions you give them, it can have its negative effects if the questions doesn't really matter. And it encourages everybody's contribution, because even students, as I said, who are introverts, who don't want to talk in class, but if you put them in small groups, they talk. But at the end of the day, they would have spoken to everybody in the class. That's how it makes it a very effective tool. It cross-pollinates and connects diverse perspectives, as I said. Listen together for passion and insight and deeper questions. And you harvest and share after the end of everything. You harvest and share collective discovery. So these 7 key principles are what you look out for if an approach can be classified as a World Cafe approach. I'll be on to answer more questions after my colleagues have spoken. So there is something to that.
How have we taken the World Cafe and created it into a protocol? We've adopted those 7 principles and looked at, I'm going to actually flip to the next slide first. There we go. And adopted this principle for classroom use. It could be used on ground, and in the last 6 months, we've adopted it for a synchronous classroom as well. So we want to encourage dialogue, and so designing questions that are important to the students and that don't seem too repetitive is very, very important. So making sure that we have questions to engender a strong discussion are important to making this particular pathway work. Once you have those particular questions, you then would place in an on-ground classroom, place the questions around the room for different pods and different cafe style tables. Assign the students randomly to group 1 and send them off to their tables. We want to have a 5 to 7 minute discussion, or allow for a 5 to 7 minute discussion, and ask someone to take notes at each of the tables and then summarize that discussion that happens and leave those notes on the table. Then you shift the groups, re-randomize them and send them off to the next table so that they can answer a different question. Again, 5 to 7 minute discussion, and then a note taker who summarizes that discussion and then leaves their notes on the table. As people move around the room, they look at those notes, they look at how things are shaping in terms of the discussion that's happening, and start to build upon that and really start developing and synthesizing those concepts and ideas that are coming forward. You continue shifting around all the tables until all the groups have answered all the questions, and then debrief by asking the very last note taker at the table to summarize the discussion for each question. We were actually going to put you guys into a round robin and have you answer a couple questions so that you could get a real feel for World Cafe, but unfortunately we can't do that right now. But so one of the pieces that I really like about this in the on-ground classroom is the fact that it makes the students move. Honestly, it's one of the key things that I like. organized chaos in that the students have to get up and shift to another table so that they are actively engaging in that thought process that I'm on to a different question and with a different group in that question. So what are the tools? What are the basic elements? As I said, 4 to 5 questions for discussion. These are really important. They have to be different. They have to be intriguing to the students. I have used World Cafe protocol in my classroom for a discussion on diversity and inclusion, a discussion on women in business, but I've also used it to do almost an icebreaker case type of discussion when I'm starting out with a new class, just to get everyone to know each other. Participants will cycle through all the questions, and each new rotation of students will build on the discussions of the prior. Tools are very simple. If you're on ground in the classroom, you need to put notepads and pencils scattered throughout on each one of the tables. Make sure that the questions for discussion are printed out and offered. If you're doing it synchronously, you need to randomize them into breakout rooms on Zoom. And you have to have that ability, that technological ability to craft those groups and then shift them, pull them back in and shift them around. So that is the basic protocol for World Cafe. And Mike, do you want to talk to us about what you've seen in the classroom, what you've observed by using this?
Sure. Hi, I'm Mike Urick. I'm from St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. You know, I want to preface what I'm going to say first by saying that Therese and Robert asked me to become a part of this project and part of some data collection about the World Cafe. And admittedly, I actually was kind of skeptical at first. I'm one of those individuals that I'm more traditional, I guess, in my pedagogy. I feel like personally, I don't manage discussions very well in the classroom. And, you know, I like activities that are kind of easy and simple. And reading through the protocol, initially it sounded to me, this is pretty complex. This takes a lot of planning. I was completely wrong about this. This is actually a very simple way to manage discussions for instructors that might not be as comfortable with that type of format like me. And actually, it requires very minimal setup, even though, you know, if you're looking at the process chart that Therese put up, it seems like there's a lot of steps, but once you do it once, it actually is pretty easy. It really doesn't require a whole lot of pre-planning, but it can get you some pretty good results. So I'm here to talk about some feedback that I received from some courses that I've used this in. And as Therese and Robert both mentioned, we did collect data on this. We're in the process of analyzing it. So this right now is some more anecdotal data. We did some surveys. We're going to analyze those. We also had some more qualitative remarks in those surveys as well. And also I asked for feedback from the students verbally after we did these activities in the next class session. I wanted to share with you a little bit of what I found. First, I used it for 3 courses in fall of 2019, 2 undergraduate courses and a graduate course. So the undergraduate courses were both face-to-face, and I used it for an upper-level HR course and an entry-level org behavior course. And what I did, how I used this was for exam review sessions. So just to review some material that we had already covered. And I was surprised, I mentioned already, how easy this was to use, but also how effective this was to review, and how much discussion came up surrounding the concepts that we talked about for the testing time frame. I usually do a pretty traditional review before my exams, and this one I think was a lot better. And I'll share with you in a couple of seconds why I think that as well. Students reported that, one, it reinforced the learning, it reinforced what we had done already. They also reported that they enjoyed the discussion, which, by the way, that org behavior class was a freshman class. They don't always like to discuss. They don't always like to participate. They actually reported that they enjoyed it. They also reported that it was a good follow-up to what we talked about already. So kind of going along with that idea of reinforcing the learning. Now, I used this, I should say I used this for 2 different classes, but 3 different class sections at the undergraduate level. In my org behavior classes, we had a big class and a smaller class. The smaller class actually did a lot better. There was more time to discuss. There were more perspectives that could be heard as the large group came back together and made a discussion. Not to say that it wasn't good for the larger class, but I think class size does play into how effective this approach can be. Myself, every time I did this, so the first time I did it, I was a little bit unfamiliar with the activity, and I felt a little bit uneasy, but by the time I did it for the fourth time, I felt like a pro at it. I felt like it was pretty easy. And so the more you do this, the more comfortable you become with this as an instructor. Now, obviously, the upper level course did have more discussion than the more behavior course, the entry level course. But again, to get for freshmen participating at all, I thought was pretty good. Okay, I think next slide, please. So this was the challenging one, though. So I did 3 undergraduate courses and a graduate course. This was a hybrid course. So I agree with what Therese was saying. This works very well face-to-face, as it can also work online in a synchronous approach. I think when you're doing hybrid or high flex, when you have some people in front of you in the classroom, some people logging in, it's a lot more difficult to do. And so I found that a little bit harder to manage. I don't think that it's impossible to do, but I think that there are some things you want to think through before you commit to this in a high flex or a hybrid environment. Again, for this approach, I use it for a general discussion on some concepts. Students still, even though we had some difficulties with managing this in the classroom, the high flex classroom, they still reported that this approach really clarified the concepts. It really related to them how they could make the concepts we were talking about in the class applied to their work environment. These are all working professionals in the graduate levels. Okay, I think the next one, please. Thanks. So some other results. Actually, I went back and I took a look at the OR behavior classes and the HR class, the undergrad. I used this for an exam review. My results from my HR undergrad course showed that it doesn't seem like a lot, but I think any percentage point is better than none. And so I did see that from the exam that I gave the prior year, the prior semester, I saw 1 percentage point increase in the scores. For the OR behavior classes that I did this exercise for, I saw 2 percentage points increase in the exam scores. So again, you might say that's not a whole lot, but I feel like students were able to retain the information, and it did show a little bit on their exam scores. This is the piece, though, that I thought was really interesting. All my undergraduate courses unanimously voted to do another World Cafe session to review for the next exam. Now, this is, I think, noteworthy because I gave them the option of not having class that day. And so I said, all right, here are your options. We can talk about some current events. We can talk about some research that I work on. You can bring some ideas of some topics related to the course that we didn't touch on a whole lot. We can have a discussion on that. Or we can do another World Cafe to review for your exam. Or we can have the day off and you can review on your own for the exam. They unanimously voted to do the World Cafe, which I thought you would rather be in, I basically told you have the day off and you voted to be in class. So again, you can look at those exam scores and say, yeah, it's not too much a marginal increase, but I think the engagement more than made up for that. Okay, I think that's it for me. So I guess I'll hand it back to Therese. You're still on mute, I think, Therese.
Sorry, thank you. That's great, thank you. Thanks, Mike, for that information. We are working on a paper for this, and which will summarize our findings and our engagement findings. The age of COVID put a little wrinkle in getting that data out and getting it collaborated and into Qualtrics in a more timely manner. Are there any questions before we let you guys go and enjoy the rest of your evening?
I actually have my hand up.
Wonderful, go for it.
Yes, I have a question. I'm glad that I think Michael mentioned that this could be used for discussion as the or the hybrid. Because I was looking for a way to improve my discussion format, and I think I might just change the format to the World Cafe. So I was wondering, I guess this question is for Robert or Michael. What do you, because I'm going to have, I'm going to have students face to face, and then I'm going to have them online, and it's synchronous. What do you have any, anything you might want to, you might suggest that we really move this into that format?
I think my suggestion would be almost to run 2 World Cafes at the same time. because that's the problem. I tried to have my online students, my face-to-face students, be in groups together, and it just didn't work. So I would have the students that are logging in all online rotate groups among themselves and put them into, I don't know if you're using Zoom or what your platform is, but to put them in those breakout rooms that day, and then the face-to-face individuals break into groups, and then to do, have those two subgroups of the class come back and discuss, and then we can draw some conclusions from that, I think, is my recommendation.
That would have been the pathway I would suggest also. It would be easier just to let the online folks have their own rotation and the on-ground folks have their own rotation. I think, unless, Robert, you have a different perspective.
No, I think I agree with what you both said. And there are also some questions in the chat room. So
that was the only hand. Marcelina, does that help?
Yes, it does. And because I was thinking, this is actually what Robert said. Is it possible to kind of have the, post the questions prior, have them, have a look at the question, and then when they come, when the discussion happens informally, they have some idea of what, the questions are, and they prepare for it. Does that, is that something that would work?
Robert, I've not seen that.
yes, yeah, I've not seen that, and it might. That is attempting to use World Cafe maybe in a flipped classroom, which we've not really tried, and I don't know how effective it will be. The spontaneity is part of it, like being in the group, talking about moving around, going to talk about, but if they know of the questions, they can, maybe if it's a case, the case study can be given to them, but then the questions will be given to them when they're in the class. They can read the case or the discussion, the reading before, but the actual questions will be provided in due time when they're in the class. That would be more.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I agree with exactly what Robert's saying. I think that part of the reason why it's best to give the questions then is, I think if you have the questions in advance, and some students, you're going to have those students, I think, that really focus on those. Some students that are probably going to ignore those until the day of. And those students that really focus on those are probably going to get in the mindset of, here's my answer, and here's the best way, and in my conversation, this is all I'm going to talk about. Where I think if you introduce them to everybody kind of at the spur of the moment, it's more like brainstorming. It generates new ideas.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I think that's a little bit more fruitful.
Judy, we hold on and take a question from the chat first and then come back to you? I think we have just a few more minutes. Go ahead, Rob.
Yep, no problem. Thanks.
You're muted, Robert.
Yes. So there are a number of questions in there. The first one is from Jennifer. So can you provide an example of a discussion question cluster, 4 or 5 questions? What's your view on keeping questions at the same level? That is application of diagnosis. So questions go more depth over time.
So I've used them 2 different ways. So when I do the case analysis, I have gone from easy to more complex and hard. And then in the rotation, they might start with the more dense question first and then end up with an easy question at the end. And that didn't work quite as well as when the questions were basically similar in complexity and intensity, I would say. So I've used this for discussing women in business and the whole Me Too movement. This was happening while I was teaching an on-ground class at Providence College a couple years ago. And that generated quite a bit of discussion. But the questions were very similar in scope, very different questions, but very similar in the complexity of the answer. The students didn't want to stop, honestly. So my recommendation is to keep them on an even even level of complexity. Mike, do you have a different perspective?
No, I think I agree. The way I worded my questions were really general in nature. They could have been answered a variety of different ways. If someone asked for a couple of examples, I'm trying to think of one that I'll keep it really general, but again, this is for a review. I would say something like, in class, we discussed job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and performance. In your opinion, which one of these three is most important and why? And so there are so many different ways you can take that question. And it's very general that you can take that at a very basic level, or you can go pretty in depth with that. And I try to word my questions to be very general like that, so that it was going to be different for each group that got that question. So that when we had the big group discussion at the end, we had a lot of ideas to kind of sift through. And actually, I was really impressed that the groups covered everything that I wanted to cover in the review anyhow. So I thought it was fantastic. So I keep them very general.
So we have about 5 minutes left. My thought is, Jennifer, if you want to send me an email, Robert, if you could type my email in the chat, I'm happy to share my diversity questions.
That's another great question, since we have about 5 minutes.
Well, Judy Tolan has questions. She's had her hand up. So,
well, my question actually, Michael and you, Teresa, pretty much answered it, was to give examples of them. And I see, because Michael, with the final exam review, I was sort of curious as to what questions you have. But I understand now they're big, broad, with umbrella questions, and then they can discuss pros and cons of a lot of different concepts.
got it. Okay, wonderful. Okay, Robert, go ahead.
So Judy Martin said, I use World Cafe in face-to-face mode about 10 years ago, but I had one person say at one of the tables while everyone else rotated. That depends to how you run it. Yeah, that's another way to do it. It depends on the instructor. When I was using it, I would let one person, I call the rapporteur, stay on the table as others go around to he or she record. Or it can be they all move and the last person on the table will provide. So it works both ways.
Thanks. Is there any advantage in getting them all to move versus keeping one at the table? I've only ever done it with keeping one at the table. And they have the written question, but they also have the knowledge of what's gone before. So it's trying to build on what they've done.
So, do you want me to take that, or you have an answer, Robert?
Oh, yeah, please, you can do that.
So, Judy, I'm actually the one that changed our protocol to rotating them around on the different tables, and it's because I was teaching a fifth-year senior class. Basically, they're in our accelerated program, and I found that the person who stayed at the table dominated the conversation so much that it was that no one else could participate in a discussion. So I got in the habit of just rotating the note keeper around and having them leave the notes on the table so that they could just build from that discussion. It just worked easier because maybe it was just the one class, the personality of that particular classroom, but the folks who stayed at the table seemed to feel like they owned that question and were dominating the discussion.
Thanks very much. I can understand that. And also, sometimes I feel like missed out because I haven't had the chance to move. So,
Jason wondered in the chat. Oh, I'm sorry, Robert. Did you have a comment? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Jason Senjum had a question in the chat saying, were there any electronic programs to record or share? Ralph says we need to wrap up the session. So this is really quick. I had people handwrite them, and then I would type the notes into kind of some summaries and email that out to students as well afterwards. So that was the way that I did it. I'm sure there are other ways to capture that information as well.
Great.
It would automatically cut off after.
Yes, another 2 minutes, I think, right? 1 minute, maybe my watch is slow. So thank you all. Are there any more questions, or please email any one of us if you have questions or want to see examples of questions or the protocol itself. Like I said, we're working on a paper and hope to have it out by the end of this year. Well, submitted by the end of this year. Let's put it that way. So,
another quick question.
yes, Judy.
In your online one, did you get them to type the notes in a Google document and leave that behind somewhere? Or how did you get them to leave it when they moved from one table to another with the online?
That's probably the best way to do it. I haven't used it online yet.
Yeah, those who use it, that one they kept one person that was recording, so it was easier for them to record back. So it depends on, for Zoom rooms, you need to be very smart at putting people in the room. Yeah, making them
I can do that. Yeah. It's recording their ideas is the challenge.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's been a really exciting
Thank
session.
you. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming. Hi, Rita.
Yeah, for you. Thank you for sharing. Good to see you.
You.
Also, to let
Thanks
you know,
for
the
coming.
chat for on the association site is still active, so you can still put in questions in there that can be answered.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.